Okay, so last week we started to try to understand in Revelation 17 who this beast is, that the woman, the great harlot, Babylon the Great, who she is riding upon. We took a couple weeks to figure out who she is, and we determined at this point in time that we don't know who she is. And we spent last week going into who this beast is. And so last week, we looked at Revelation 12. We saw this dragon, this great dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. We saw this dragon was called Satan, and he wanted to devour Jesus and his people. So it's a dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. And then we looked at Daniel chapter 2, and we saw this large statue with a head of gold, a chest and arms of silver, a belly and thighs of bronze, lower legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. And we saw that in the last part, the lower legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay, that there was possibly 2 phases of this last kingdom. Because we saw the legs of iron and then the feet of iron and clay. We talked about how great, how mighty that kingdom was. It was the last kingdom of men upon the earth. And that when Jesus' kingdom, when he returns, be like a big rock which will smash at the feet, and the rest of them will come tumbling down. And that's the submission of every king of the earth unto the King of kings and the Lord of lords. And then we saw Daniel 7, we saw the 4 beasts, we saw the lion with the wings, representative of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. We saw the bear who was lifted up on one side, which is symbolic of the Medo-Persian Empire. We saw the 4-headed leopard with 4 wings, that was symbolic of the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great, and then his 4 generals took over the 4 kingdoms that came from that. And then we saw the last beast that had 10 horns and 1 little horn that had a mouth and eyes that spoke pompous words. Those are the things we looked at last week, and so we're going to continue this week. We'll start in Revelation 13. Revelation 13. We'll start in verse 1. We'll read the verse 10. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who was able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. He was given authority to continue for 42 months. Sounds very similar to Daniel 7, doesn't it? Then he opened his mouth and blasphemed against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And so we see this description of 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. It sounds very similar to what we see in Revelation 12, which describes the dragon, which has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. So there's 3 extra crowns this time around. But the question becomes, is this the same exact beast? In Daniel 12, it's described as a dragon. And then later on in Daniel 12, it's given great clarity by saying that this great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan. So the dragon in Daniel 12 is representative of Satan directly, who he is. And there's going to be similarities between Satan and his kingdom, which is what we see in chapter 13. In chapter 13, it's never described as a dragon. So mention of a dragon there. In fact, very explicit terms are given. It's called, it looks like a leopard. It has the feet of a bear, and its mouth like the mouth of a lion. So if you can imagine a dragon who's already on the land. Remember, we saw in chapter 12, he's been made earthbound. So maybe before this time he had wings. But now I guess imagine his wings being clipped off and he's earthbound now. And then this other beast comes out of the sea. There's similarities. They both have 10 horns, both have 7 heads, but one has 7 crowns and one has 10 crowns. And so this beast comes out of the sea, and you can just imagine this beast in your head. I mean, I don't have a picture to show you. I saw some pictures online. They look pretty interesting and pretty accurate. But imagine coming out of the sea to this dragon on the shore. We have this creature that has feet like a bear. And let's assume that this looks like a leopard. Let's say the body is like a leopard. Okay, maybe the tail is like a leopard too. But then it has 7 heads, and each of those 7 heads is like a lion. So a 7-headed lion, leopard, bear. Sounds pretty intimidating to me. And this is why the whole world marvels and says, who is able to make war with him? You think of a lion, you think of the most powerful thing about it is its head, its mouth, jaws. You think of a bear, you think the most powerful thing about the bear is its paws, its claws. You think of a leopard, you think the biggest advantage it has is its speed, its agility, and its ability to hide from other creatures, to sneak up on them, to prowl, and to do those things. If you think back to last week and Daniel 7, let's turn to Daniel 7 for a second. Should be piquing your interest as I read the description in Revelation 13 of this last beast. And it should make you think of Daniel 7, 4 through 6. These first 3 beasts of Daniel 7, these first 3 kingdoms of Daniel 7. So Daniel 7, 3 says, and 4 beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion. Oh, what do you know? With eagle's wings. Verse 5, and suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. That's the second beast. Verse 6, after this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard. And so we have all 3. It's like a combination, a compilation of all 3 of these first beast kingdoms. And we know it represents Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. And so what does it mean that this last beast of Revelation 13, this last day's kingdom of the Antichrist, what does it mean that it's almost like a compilation of all those beasts which came before it in Daniel 7? Well, number one, it's pointing you back to Daniel 7. That's first and foremost. That should make you think of that. It should point you to this last beast spoken about in verse 7. It says this, after this I saw in night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, had huge iron teeth. So its teeth, the lion teeth, like iron. Okay? It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its bare feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Who's ever really seen legitimately a beast that has bear-like feet and claws, a head of a lion, and a body of a leopard? I'm sure Daniel had no way to describe it, because a creature does not exist in reality. It's something that is a vision. It's apocalyptic language to help us understand how dangerous this last beast is. Not only how dangerous the last beast is, but also that it's a compilation of the first 3 beasts. And so imagine all the kingdoms that they accomplish, all the area that they controlled, the area that Babylon controlled, the area that Medo-Persia controlled, the area that Greece controlled. This last beast would control all of that area at some point in time, and it would actually be 2 different times. But right now, let's focus on the first time, this last time, I mean. So you see these things happening, and it's very similar to what we see described in Daniel chapter 13. But then there's also different, like I said, difference between the beast in chapter 12 and the beast in chapter 13. The beast in chapter 12 is representative of Satan himself, where the beast in chapter 13 is representative of the kingdom of this beast. And it says right here, at the end of chapter 13 of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 2, it says, the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. So you can imagine, you know, we think of the kings of old when they had people who were going to represent them and fight for them. Maybe knights, they would knight them with a sword in the right and a sword in the left shoulder. Imagine this dragon giving its power, its great authority to this last days kingdom of his. Okay? And then we read on in verse 3 of chapter 13 of Revelation. It says, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. Now remember, this beast is representative of the kingdom of the Antichrist. But oftentimes we see in Scripture, we study the beasts of different things, that it's also representative of the leader of that kingdom. So there's maybe some up in the air about what it's talking about here. This one that had a deadly wound and was healed. Is it the Antichrist, the leader of the kingdom, who was healed in a mortal way and then healed? Or was it the kingdom itself? Or maybe it's both. And if we talked about last week about the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay, how that's representative of two different phases of the kingdom, well, this could possibly be pointing to that as well. Two different phases where it's mortally wounded and it comes back. I mean, where in history have you ever seen or ever heard of a mighty and great kingdom which was taken down and made nothing and then rose back up many years later and became as powerful as was the first time? I don't know of any. Does anyone here know of any? I don't know of any like that. But this is what this last kingdom is going to be like. It's a kingdom that's from the past, but it rises back up. Most people want to point to this being the Antichrist. Well, maybe it's both. Maybe the Antichrist himself. Maybe an assassination attempt was placed upon him, and he survived it somehow. And that would point back to him trying to be a false Messiah, trying to counterfeit Jesus, because Jesus is the real one who was killed and then rose again from the grave, right? And so we have that going on there as well. But who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Remember, the beast is the kingdom, and it's not making war with one person here. It's making war with the whole kingdom. And this kingdom is so mighty and so powerful that no one is able to make war with it. But then it says in verse 5, once again, he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he's given authority to continue for 42 months. Now that's talking about, we go back to Daniel 7 again. We know that one horn came up, three horns bowed down before it, and that horn had a mouth and eyes like a man, and it spoke pompous words against the Most High. We know that's talking about the Antichrist. We know right here it's talking about the Antichrist. And so the word he here, it kind of goes back and forth between the Antichrist and the kingdom itself. So there's some kind of up in the air, and there's kind of some ambiguity here about who it's actually talking about, the beast itself, the kingdom, or the Antichrist, who is the leader of the kingdom. Which one is going to have the deadly wound and come back from the grave, so to speak? Either way, we do know that the kingdom itself will. Whether the Antichrist will have that kind of experience or not, I have no idea. But we see that he opened his mouth and blasphemed against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. We talked about this many times before. The midway point. This is the marker right here. The midway point of the last 7 years. The start of it is the peace treaty. The start of it is the two witnesses coming on the stage, prophesying. You see the Revelation 11. But the midway point is the abomination of desolation that happens in the temple of God, the third temple, where the Antichrist goes in there and declares himself to be God. Not the Antichrist himself, but the God behind the Antichrist, little g, that is, the devil. Because he wants all to bow down and worship him. So we see these things happening all throughout the scriptures. And verse 7, it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So the saints are still here when these things are happening. This is after the midway point now, and he's making war with the saints. He's overcoming them, and the saints are here. We're here. Maybe we're here, maybe we're not. Maybe I'm gone and you're here. You know, maybe Kevin's gone because he's pretty old. Maybe he's gone. Maybe he's gone, and Seamus is here. You know, or maybe we're all still here. But the fact is, there are saints here. The same kind of saints who Paul wrote to in his epistles. The saints of Colossae. You know, he's writing to saints. Saints are not people who are just like Jewish people. You know, if you want to make that kind of a claim. But, you know, Paul, in most of his letters to the Gentile church, he's writing to the saints. And so the saints will still be here. And will be given over to him. He'll overcome us. Not necessarily overcome our faith. Hopefully that'll happen to none of us. Although that will happen to many people according to Matthew 24. The love of most will go cold because laws is abounding around them. But if we persevere to the end, the only way he'll ever overcome us is physically. And that's nothing. We sang this morning that death has lost its sting. It's so true. You know, my daughter Emily, she goes out, she attends to our garden, she picks the garden. Every once in a while there'll be a bee out there. And that'll stir up a little fear in her heart because she's allergic to bee stings. Now, if she has a bee sting, there's some things that are going to happen inside of her that she can't control, right? And if she was surrounded by a swarm of bees, she'd probably be pretty fearful about what they're going to do to her. If I said, honey, sweetheart, there's no stingers in them. A bunch of carpenter bees. She'd be like, oh, no big deal, right? No big deal. See, death has lost its sting for us. We don't fear death because the stinger has been taken out of death. Because we knew who we belonged to. We know where we're going in the end, right? And so the devil seeks to get us to forget that. He wants us to forget those things. He wants us to fear physical pain. He wants us to fear death because there is kind of an unknown. You know, none of us have passed through death before. We know what the Word says. We know what awaits on the other side according to Scripture. But it's like the Pilgrim's Progress.
Right. Yeah, that's what
they get to the water, it's like, oh, I got to go through those waters, the waters of death, and they're going to drown. But then the light comes. I know to whom I belong. You know, so I trust my soul to him. I trust my spirit to him. I trust my life to him. But you have to understand, saints, that if you are alive during this time, the tribulation will be greater than it ever has been in all the world. I think all of us here have probably read biographies. We've watched the Torchlighter series of different things. We've heard about saints going with things they've gone through throughout the ages, even now in Iran and China and North Korea. We read about these things. We know about these things. And we're kind of, you know, at a distance. We're not really there. We're not really experiencing. So it's kind of almost like a fairy tale to us because we know they're going through it. We know it's not fake or false or some kind of fable, but still, it's to some degree we're kind of separated from it. Because let's face it, no matter who in here has been punched in the face when they're preaching, or somehow physically assaulted while you're preaching, or stand up for the truth, we've never ever experienced things they've experienced, right? So there is an unknown to it, but we know the God of the unknown. We know the God who knows everything. Nothing's unknown to him. And so at this point in time, it comes down to trust. Do I trust on my own feelings? Do I trust in the things I don't know about? And the fears that are associated with those things? Or do I trust in the God who knows everything? Right? And so these things are going to happen. Maybe you will be here, maybe you won't. But these things are going to happen. And if you are here, be prepared for these things. Because this is God's will. It says here, once again, it was granted to him to make war with the saints. Who granted it to him? God did. God granted it to him. Make war with the saints and to overcome them. And we know that, I'm not going into all this now, but if we go back in chapter 12, we know that some do escape too. So I don't know which part you'll be a part of, if you're here or not. But it says, going on in verse 8 of chapter 13, and all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. So pay attention to these things. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. That could be you, that could be me. He who kills with a sword must be killed with the sword. So don't be taking up swords, pick up guns. We're not to be patriots and fight for our freedoms and our lands and our houses and our food and all our possessions with moth and rust will destroy and thieves break in and steal. They mean nothing. Souls mean everything. And so don't be taking up swords, because there won't only be a temptation to be fearful. What will happen? There'll be a temptation to preserve your life in an ungodly, unbiblical way. There will be that temptation. Mark my words. Especially if you live here in America, you grew up like I did. I was in the Army for almost 3 years, right? And that's what you were taught. It was something like bred into you, And I grew up, my mom and dad were both in the military. My grandpa was in the Navy. My uncle was in the Coast Guard. We grew up like that. And we weren't like gun-toting hunting guys. Most of us didn't hunt, but we grew up as patriots and we would defend ourselves. And my family is still like that to this day. I'm not like that. And just this past Friday, me and Adam were laboring with this young man, maybe 19, 20 years old, brother? At the end of the night, he started talking with Chris first. He was getting all up in Chris's face. I was across the road. I said, well, I got to get over there to make sure this guy doesn't get in Chris's face too far. And if he's going to punch, he can punch me in the face instead. Right. And we brought him off to the side. Me brought him off to the side, and he was claiming to be a Christian, claiming to be he's a oneness Pentecostal, which is a false cult anyway. They only believe in the Trinity. But he was saying, you need the baptism of the Holy Spirit. You need to speak in tongues. That's what you need. That's what's missing here. But meanwhile, he's cussing at us, and he's threatening to punch us and to beat us up. And that's the reason I bring it up, because in the Army, you're basically paid to be a trained killer. You're paid to be a trained fighter, to fight for your nation. And there's always, no matter what nation you go in, there's going to be that about the nation where they want you to have national pride. And they want you to be a defender of the nation. Some nations require military service. America doesn't do that. America does require that if you're 18 years old and you're a guy, you sign up for the registry. In case they draft, they'll draft you. Now they're expanding that to women in America. Now in Israel, you have it, what is it, 3 years for men, 2 years for girls? I think in Israel, is that right, brother?
I know 2 years. I believe it's 2 years.
Okay. I thought it was less for women than it was for men or something like that. But they have they have mandatory military service there. So it's going to be that no matter what nation in the world you go into. And we need to understand not only that our life does not belong to us and death has lost its sting, therefore we're not going to be fearful of death, but we're not taking up arms to defend ourselves, defend our property, defend our nation, because those things do not belong to us. And we're aliens and strangers here. We are pilgrims here, just passing through. We are not to do those things. We go like this, hands up, lifting up holy hands to the Lord. Not taking up guns and carnal weapons to shoot people and to stab them. I know a lot about guns, but I'm not going to use guns to kill people. That'd be a shame to send them to hell to preserve my own soul when I know where I'm going. Greater love has no man that lays his life down for his friends. So I lay my life down for my friends and for my enemies. It's like Jesus did. That's what we're going to be called to in the last days. If we're here, we're going to have that calling above, beyond everything else. We make preparations. We try to live out in rural areas. So we're outside of the worst parts of it, probably in the big cities. But the devil can still find us. The governments can still find us. And as you can see, who's controlling the last days government? The devil's controlling it, right? The devil's all up in governments, man. He's all up on politicians' lives and ruling over them and influencing them and controlling them even. It's all up in that kind of stuff. And so while the government isn't always necessarily our enemy, and politicians, all of them aren't always necessarily our enemy, there's a good portion of them that are. And even those who claim to be Christians now become fake Christians. They'll expose themselves as fake Christians, and we'll see later on what happens. And so we see this beast and the things it's going to do, how the similarities are to Satan himself, the similarities to the four beasts we see in Daniel 7. And we see these things happen. We're kind of getting an idea, the two-phase part. We get an idea what it's like, how it's the area it's encompassing, as far as the control it has over land and people, and what it's going to do in the last days and what God's going to allow it to do. That's really what it breaks down to. God's allowing it to do all these things. Okay, chapter 17 of Revelation. Let's go there. And we'll start in verse 7. But the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. Now he's going to go on. He's not really going to talk about the woman very much. He'll talk about the beast, who she's sitting on. So that must become some kind of key. That he said, I'm going to reveal to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she's sitting upon, and then he starts talking about the beast. There's got to be some correlation there. There's got to be something that reveals something about the other thing, you know? Which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Verse 8. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. So we see in verse 8, this beast was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. So we have to kind of figure out, when this kind of language is being used, is the angel speaking to John of his time in his vision, where he is in the vision, or where he is in actuality, reality in the 1st century AD. And I really think the only way to understand verse 8 properly, where it says that kind of language, is that he's being spoken to as he is in the future. Okay? He isn't literally in the future. It's a vision. He's there in the spirit. But it's him being spoken to in the future. So with that in mind, let's read that again. The beast that you saw was, so by the time this is being spoken to in the vision, in this chronological view here, that whatever point in time, this is in the last 7 years, he's saying to John, the beast was. So it had a past. And right now, it is not. But it will ascend to the bottomless pit. Okay, and that makes you think of Revelation 11. Let's turn there just for a second here. And Revelation 9 as well. So Revelation 9, we'll just start with the 5th trumpet here, which I believe is just past the halfway point. If you go back to my study in Revelation 9, you'll see what I'm talking about that. The 5th trumpet is just past the halfway point. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any green tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God in their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. The torment is like torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days men will seek death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like woman's hair, and their teeth were like the lion's teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months. Yes, king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, who in name in Greek is Abaddon, but in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek has the name Apollyon. One woe is past, behold, still two more woes are coming after these things. So this right here, we see the demonic forces, the spiritual forces behind the rising of this kingdom. It's coming from the bottomless pit. Those locusts aren't locusts. Those are demons. I'm not going to go into great detail about it. You can go back and watch that teaching about that. These are demons coming out of the bottomless pit. And there's some kind of authority structure within demons. And the king over the bottomless pit is not Satan himself. He's never been in the bottomless pit yet. He hasn't been there yet. There's some other high-ranking demon coming out of the bottomless pit with all these demons to bring torment to men for 5 months. Either doing it directly or doing it through other men who they're possessing or oppressing or leading. Okay? Revelation 11. Once again, this is the two witnesses come on the stage at the very beginning of the last 7 years, and they speak for 42 months. So it says in chapter 11, verse 2. They speak for 42 months. Okay? These two lampstands. But listen to what happens in verse 7. After they're done with their testimony, they've been speaking for 3.5 years. They're halfway through the last 7 years. When they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit, that's what we're just reading about in chapter 17, right, will make war against them and overcome them and kill them. Now before this, two witnesses had the power. If anyone came against them, they could strike them, they could destroy them, they could stop them, whatever way they wanted to. Basically, God had put all the power he had into their hands to destroy anyone who would come against them. But here we have their testimony's finished now. So they're open game for the enemy. And so this beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit overcomes them, makes war with them, kills them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. That's Jerusalem. And those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and not allow their dead bodies to be put into graves. So much they hate them. They even desecrate them in their death. Won't give them the honor of even being buried. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice and make merry, and let's make a holiday out of these two witnesses being killed. Here's a gift for you, and here's a gift for you. It's the new Christmas, I guess. Because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and a great fear fell on those who saw them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they ascended to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies saw them. In the same hour, there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. In the earthquake, 7,000 people were killed, and the rest were afraid and gave glory to the God of heaven. That's all the halfway point. Let's go back to chapter 17 now. So this is the beast that when he's seeing all the vision, remember the chronology of Revelation kind of jumps back and forth. It's not like a from beginning to end way it works. It's quite a few sequences. And so we're noticing now in this part where he's describing the beast and helping us understand who it is, that he will arise, this beast will arise out of the bottomless pit right at about the halfway point. Okay, so while he's speaking to John here, it's not the halfway point yet, obviously, because it says, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. It is not. Okay? So the power behind this last day's kingdom, this kingdom of iron and clay, this kingdom that has feet like a bear, a body like a leopard, and a mouth like a lion, and 7 heads, and 10 horns, and 7 crowns. This last day's beast is given power from the dragon, and I think we can practically see how the power was given, can't we? The bottomless pit is open with the key, and all these demons come out. So that's the power of Satan right there. You know, Satan has no power like God does, right? The power he has is in his foot soldiers himself, the demons. And so the demons go out into the world and they do false signs and wonders. They possess people. They influence people. They speak to people. They lead people. And that is the power of Satan himself to this kingdom. Verse 8. So they will ascend out of the bottomless pit and they will go to perdition. So they come out of the bottomless pit. They haven't learned their lesson, right? And they're going to go back to perdition. They're going back to destruction. They're only going to be around for 3.5 years, these demons that come out of the bottomless pit. And those who dwell on earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. So in some kind of way, this kingdom really never goes away. It's still kind of hanging in there, hanging around. Never gets completely destroyed. So it still is. And if you have a footnote in your Bible like I do, the New King James Version says shall be present. But yet it's like it is present. So there's like something going on, there's a stirring up of it, a reformation of it, but it doesn't have the power it had until those demons come out of the bottomless pit and give it this power. And it tells you, I think it might even tell us why those demons are in the bottomless pit in the first place. Why did God send them there? It doesn't really tell us those things. But if this is the same power that was behind the first phase of this kingdom, maybe God said to that first phase of the kingdom, that's enough. You're going to wait to the bottomless pit until I say otherwise. Just a possibility. I don't have any great authority to say something. It's something I've been thinking about. Verse 9. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now, anytime you see the word the 7 mountains, the first thing people think about is the city of Rome. Okay? Now, Rome doesn't really have 7 mountains. It has 7 hills. Okay? They're not really very big. Not that they have to be big, but I don't really consider them mountains, but more like hills. But this is one of those situations where, you have this something about eschatology, and there's several characteristics of this one thing, and one thing you find meets one characteristic, and you say, well, that's it. That's it. Like with the vaccination right now. People want to say it's the mark of the beast because they're shooting into people. And because there's people losing their jobs because their jobs are forcing them to either get it or walk away. They're talking about not being able to travel without it. Who knows what's going to happen next? I don't know. But it's not the mark of the beast. Just because it seems to fit maybe one of the qualifications or 2 of the qualifications. So just because this beast has 7 mountains, and Rome, the city of Rome, has 7 hills, and just because Rome at one point in time was, the seat of power against Christianity, persecuting Christianity, just because the Roman Catholic Church was, headquartered there and still is, and it used to persecute Christians like crazy, does not mean that it's talking about Rome. You understand that? We can't jump to those conclusions. Besides, I think it's going to tell us here in a second who what these 7 mountains are symbolic of. 7 mountains in Scripture oftentimes are symbolic of just power, of a nation, of a country. I don't have the verse off the top of my head, but I remember in the Old Testament, when it talks about Babylon coming, talks about this great mountain, this great destroying mountain, it calls it. Babylon is not sitting upon a mountain. There's no mountains there. Okay, but it's symbolic because mountains are powerful. They're seen as mighty. You look at them, it's like when people climb Mount Everest, the biggest mountain in the world, or K2, the second biggest mountain, it's like this big achievement. And people have died upon those mountains trying to climb them just to have this big achievement. I've climbed the biggest mountain in the world because it's seen as powerful. It's seen as overcoming it and triumphing over it, conquering this difficult thing. And so I don't think this is talking about Rome. It's talking about 7 kingdoms, not one specific city. Remember, the harlot is a city. But these 7 mountains, these 7 heads are symbolic of kingdoms throughout history. Okay, so in verse 10, it says, there are also 7 kings. Remember, kings and kingdoms, these things they go together. You can't have a king without a kingdom. You can have a kingdom without a king or a primary ruler. And it says this, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. So once again, let's ask this question again. We saw in verse 8, was, is not, and will. we determine at that point in time it must be talking about John being spoken to in his vision in that time frame. But is it the same thing right here when it says in verse 10, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come? I think it's talking about the first century now. It's switching back to the first century. So the 5 have fallen, the 1 is would be Rome, the one John is living at that point in time, and then there's 1 to come. 5 plus 1 is 7. And when that 1 comes, he will continue a short time. And really, I believe it's talking about the second phase of that number 7, when it says continue a short time. Verse 11, the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th. Well, there's not 8 heads, are there? Are there 8 heads? No, there's 7 heads. So once again, we have this second phase idea going on here. Not just the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay, not about his deadly wound, being destroyed, coming back from the dead, rising out of the bottomless pit. Now we see the 7th is also the 8th, but it's still the 7th. It's like a resurrection of that 7th kingdom to come back and do it again. The same thing he did the first time. But yet he still, even when he comes back and tries again and be the 8th, he's still going to perdition, destruction. Okay? And then verse 12. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. So this last kingdom, which has the 10 horns, represents the last kingdom, okay, the 8th, which is also the 7th. The 10 horns represent 10 kings, over 10 kingdoms, who have no kingdom as of yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour. 1 hour just means a short time. It doesn't mean literally 60 minutes. It just means a short time. They receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. And we know from Daniel that 3 bow down, are plucked out, and the little horn goes in its place. So for 3 of them, he gets direct control, direct power over the kingdom. Their other 7, they're simply becoming one mind with him and giving their power and authority to the beast by following him. And who are they primarily making war with in verse 14? The Lamb. Because when the Lamb returns, there'll be a 200 million man army. And they think in their foolish minds that because they have 200 million men, they're going to beat the Lamb. And we have this little lamb come along who has 7 horns and 7 eyes and looks like he's been slain, and he just wipes them out. A little lamb. That's a strong lamb right there. He wiped out this kingdom that has 7 heads with lions, right? Claws of a bear, iron teeth, a leopard body, and he's like, I'm a lamb. You're dead. You know, they don't stand a chance. I mean, a lamb doesn't even have, like, we have these little teeth right here, these canines. They don't even have, I don't think they even have canines in their mouth, you know? But he's going to destroy this beast like it's nothing. And that's the hope we have. That's the glorious hope we have in Jesus Christ. Okay, so let's talk about these 8 kingdoms now, okay? And we'll spend the rest of our time here talking about these 8 kingdoms and who they are. And so we basically know some of them already. The first one's going to be Egypt, okay? And what I want you to understand about all 8 of these kingdoms, and the 8th one is just the 7th one redone, okay, is that they all had power over the people of God, and they all persecuted the people of God in some way, okay? So Egypt. At first, Egypt was good, right? I mean, Joseph was second in power. The people came there, had Goshen, the best of the land. But Joseph died, and the Pharaoh came, didn't know Joseph, and they were put into slavery. And we all know the story of Pharaoh and Exodus and how he tried to destroy them and wipe them out. Tried to destroy all the little ones at one point in time, but Moses was saved to be a deliverer, just like Jesus was saved later on. We saw these things. We know Exodus, the Red Sea, all the things that happened that God delivered them out of them. But the Pharaoh himself, we know, is a type of Antichrist. A type of Antichrist. Okay, so that's the first kingdom. Second kingdom is Babylon. Now Babylon I'm sorry, not Babylon. I'm jumped ahead. The second one is Assyria. Syria is the kingdom to the north of Israel that came down to the northern kingdom of Israel, taken into captivity. Let's go to 2 Kings. 2 Kings 18. So these beasts are going to be in chronological order. And we know that the devil had something to do with each of these kingdoms because of what they tried to do to the people of God, to destroy them. 2 Kings 18, starting in verse 9. Now it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, who's king of Judah, the southern kingdom of Israel, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, the northern kingdom, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria, which is the capital of the northern kingdom, and besieged it. At the end of 3 years, they took it. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is, the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken. Then the king of Assyria carried Israel away captive to Assyria and put them in Hala and by the Habor, the river of Gazan, in the cities of the Medes. Because they did not, here's the reason why, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant and all that Moses, servant of the Lord, had commanded. They would not hear them, neither hear nor do them. So this is the second beast. They take the 10 northern tribes, which always had wicked kings, never had a good king, taking away into captivity because of their disobedience, because they did not obey God. Okay, number 3. So we've seen Egypt first, then Assyria. Now we're talking about Babylon. 2 Kings 24 and 25. We're not going to read through it, but both those last 2 chapters of 2 Kings talk about this. And we know about it. We've seen this already in the large statue. The head of gold was Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, right? And so we see that. So Babylon takes the southern kingdom of Judah into captivity. And ultimately, what happens is the first temple is destroyed by the kingdom of Babylon. Why? Because at first, God was merciful to the southern kingdom. He let only some of them go into captivity, left some behind, left the king there behind. But that king revolted against the prophets, against what God said, and against the king of Babylon, and therefore they came back and destroyed it all, wiped it all out, including the temple. So the first temple was destroyed by Babylon. Number 4, the 4th kingdom is the Medes and the Persians. They took over the kingdom of Babylon, and that wasn't really what made them one of the beasts, so that's part of it. But also, there's a guy named Haman. You familiar with Haman? Yeah. Okay. From the book of Esther, and you can find this spoken about in Esther chapter 3 through chapter 7. An attempt is made by Haman, because he hates Mordecai primarily, that's where it starts, he hates Mordecai, to not only have Mordecai hanged by the gallows, but also to destroy all the Israelites throughout the Medo-Persian kingdom. But of course, that plan is thwarted by Mordecai and by Queen Esther and by King Ahasuerus when he becomes aware of it, that he was deceived. And the Jewish flipped the script. They can't change the law, but they flipped the script and they killed their enemies instead. And so God preserves them. But we see within that, this guy named Haman trying to destroy the Jewish people. He's a type of Antichrist too. And we have this song called Gallows that we like, that Jess Ray sings, that talks about this very thing. The devil is going to hang from his own gallows. We listen on the way here. The devil is going to hang from his own gallows. The very things he intends for the people of God are going to be brought upon him by God himself. And so the 4th one is the Medes and Persians and Haman. Number 5 is Greece. Turn to Daniel 8. Turn to Daniel chapter 8. We know that Greece was led by Alexander the Great. He goes across the quote-unquote face of the whole earth, destroys the Medo-Persian Empire, conquers all the way to India, present-day India, part of North Africa, including Egypt. And then he dies at a very young age, I think like 33 or something like that, he dies. Very young age. And then his 4 generals fight over his kingdom, and they split up into 4 parts. And we're going to read in Daniel chapter 8, starting in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. But the ram, pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver him from his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. As I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacking the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled him. And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of the transgression, the army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice, and he cast truth down to the ground. And he did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? He said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Okay, go down to verse 19. This angel said to Daniel, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time with the indignation for the appointed time the end shall be. The ram which you saw, having 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, Medo-Persian Empire. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between his eyes is the first king, that's Alexander the Great. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in his place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. In the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. He shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. And the vision of the evenings and mornings, which was told, is true. Therefore seal out the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. So out of this Greek kingdom, when it's split up into 4 kingdoms, out of one of those kingdoms, a king will arise and will attack the people of Israel, will stop the sacrifices in the temple, the daily sacrifice. I do twice a day, daily sacrifice, stop in the temple. And he will have a power that's not his own power. It's given to him by somebody else. And he will be destroyed without human means. This sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Starting to sound familiar. This is kind of what happened in Daniel 7, where that stone cut out, not with man's hand, destroyed the feet made of clay and iron. So this guy right here, this king, I'll tell you his name in a second, he is a type of Antichrist as well. It's almost like exactly what's going to happen in the last days. And he's even destroyed without human means. God puts a stop to him. Okay? His name is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Epiphanes means God manifest. That's what it means. But some called him Epimanes, which means maniac instead, because he was a maniac. He wasn't God manifest. But if his power comes from the devil, it would make sense that he would have a name like God manifest, because the devil wants to be God, doesn't he? He opposed the Jews' worship of Yahweh, like known before. In fact, his father had no problem with the Jewish people worshiping, having their own religion, worshiping their own God, having their own traditions, their own laws. But when Epiphanes IV, Antiochus, came along, he opposed the Jews' worship more than Nebuchadnezzar, more than Cyrus, more than Darius, more than Artaxerxes. The Jews rebelled against his rule over them. And after one rebellion, he decided to outlaw the practice of Judaism. He outlawed circumcision, the study of Torah, and the keeping of the dietary law. He is considered to be the Antichrist of the Old Testament. That's what he's considered to be. Or actually the forerunner to the last days Antichrist. Now, after he took over Jerusalem and outlawed these things and was coming against the rebellion, in the temple of God, he exalted a statue to Zeus, the god that he believed was manifest in him. So Zeus is probably still a name for devil. And then he offered swine's blood upon the altar in the temple. He also removed the sacred vessels from the temple, including the menorah. However, during the Maccabean revolt, and this is where stuff like the book of Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, comes into play. It's not scripture, but it's history, and it's good to read about these things. This is where this comes into play, where the Maccabean revolt, led by Judah Maccabee, recovered Jerusalem, restored Jewish law, and cleansed the temple. And Hanukkah, you might know this, is a Jewish festival commemorating the recovery of Jerusalem and subsequent rededication of the Second Temple. It's also known as the Festival of Lights, or Feast of Dedication. And it talks about this in, I think, John chapter 10, where Jesus was in Jerusalem during that time. Okay? And there's actually some miracles that went on during that, like the lamp. They only had so many days of oil for the lamp, but it kept on going because it took so many days to actually get oil from the olives for the lamp to continue it burning, to be burning continuously. And somehow, miraculously, it was kept burning all that time, even though it didn't have enough oil. That's not found in Scripture per se, but that's how it goes. And the fact that Jesus was there during that, it seems like he agrees with it, basically. Okay? So that's the fifth kingdom. Kingdom of Greece, and then Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who comes from that kingdom. The sixth kingdom, the kingdom that is. About chapter 17 now. The kingdom when he's talking about the five have fallen, the one is, in verse 10 of chapter 17. That is the kingdom of Rome. They take over the Holy Land. They eventually destroy the second temple. Now, we talked about this last week for a little bit. We looked at Daniel chapter 9 and how the people of the prince who is to come destroy the sanctuary. Okay? That's not talking about the people of Rome. Now, there was a Roman army that destroyed the second temple, but that army was comprised mostly of local neighbors to Israel who hated Israel, Arabs. Okay? That's who destroyed the temple. So that's the one who is. So five have fallen, one is, which is the one he's in right then. Actuality, first century, Rome. So that's six. So who's the seventh? And if there's an eighth, which is a revival or a second phase of the seventh, well, the idea that most people try to put out there, that the last days kingdom is a revived Roman Empire, or they'll say it's an empire that has the same kind of principles as Rome, of Senate and that kind of stuff, or they'll say it's going to be Europe in general, which is Rome was a part of. If it's going to be that, then we have to have three phases of the Roman Empire, wouldn't we? Because they're the sixth, 7th, and now they're the 8th too. So the 7th must be someone who comes after the Roman Empire, and there's a second phase of. Is it a Islamic empire? Well, that would seem to make sense. Has anyone studied the caliphate over the last week or so? Anybody? Ottoman Empire, okay, that's like the latter end of the caliphate. The caliphate was, really it was the Islamic kingdom after Muhammad died, okay? And we're going to talk about this more in depth next week. I'm not going to go into any more this week, but I know I'm kind of leaving you hanging, but we're going to talk about it more next week, about the 7th and the 8th kingdom. I think, just to kind of pull a Kevin here to the end of the story before it happens, I believe it's an Islamic empire. The 7th one is the caliphate / Ottoman Empire later on, and then it stops. It comes to an end, almost like an abrupt end too. And then it's going to be revived in the last days again to be the 8th. The 7th, which is also the 8th. Okay? And we're going to talk about stuff next week like Ezekiel 38. We're going to talk about scriptures about the places Jesus will destroy when he returns. The people who will come against Israel when he returns. Talk about those kind of things so we can kind of pinpoint it even more. I think at this point in time, I mean, who else can we pick? Right. Really, that even that helps narrow it down. If Rome is not it, because we can't have 3 phases of the Roman Empire, right? If Rome is not it, who else came after them? Who else can we pick who fits the mold of having control over the Holy Land, persecuting the people of God? Who else can we pick after Rome? Besides the caliphate, besides the Ottoman Empire, who else can we pick? There's no one else to pick. I mean, just study history a little bit. There's no one else to pick. But next week, I think what we'll do is we'll solidify it really hard, because we're going to go into all these passages and talk about the Antichrist, the countries that are with him, the countries Jesus is going to destroy, all different language, like stuff like that. It won't be next week, obviously, but the week after that. But we'll talk about all those things in the next teaching. But I at this point in time, I'm to the point where even if I didn't have that, I'm already convinced. Me personally. You might not be convinced yet, but I'm personally already convinced after I go through all these things. So once again, we see there's 2 phases in many different ways. We see that from the legs of iron and clay, feet of iron and clay. We see his deadly wound, and then reviving, coming out of the bottomless pit. We see the 7th is also the 8th. We see these things happening. We see throughout history the different things that happen. And we see what the kingdoms are like, how they're constantly trying to destroy the people of God, and they constantly want control over Jerusalem. Why is that? Because that's God's place. That's where Jesus is going to return. And if you want to battle with somebody, you're going to go where they say they're going to be, to meet them in battle. And we saw. They're there to battle the Lamb, to make war with the Lamb. And so, as we're going through this, we're kind of seeing more and more, once again, if this is the Islamic empire, okay, and it's trying to help us understand more about the woman by telling us about the beast, maybe it's going to help us determine who the woman is. It's going to have to go along with all that. Okay, I'm going to stop there and open the floor for discussion now.
So do you feel like at the point when all the nations are gathered to go through the battle, the great day, do you think at that point are the majority of people are deceived at that point, or are they're just fighting against God? Like they know that God is God, but they're just fighting against him, like as a one last ditch rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be great delusion, obviously, when it comes to like the thing that we read today, who can make war against the beast? Who is like him? So there's going to be an exalting of himself, the Antichrist and the kingdom exalting itself above God. but the people of God making war with the saints and even overcoming them. And people are looking like, look, they're winning. We want to be on the winning side. Let's join the winning side. And of course, they're not reading the Word of God. So they're given over to a strong delusion. So there is a strong delusion involved, no doubt about it. I mean, just taking the mark of the beast is strong delusion because you're giving yourself over to the Satan himself. But I think people are really they know what they're doing at that point. They know they're warring against the Lamb, but I think they're going to win. I mean, if all the Lamb's enemies are being wiped out, all Lamb's, sheep are being wiped out, well, Lamb should be nothing. So that's kind of the way I envision it and picture it, taking into account all the counsel of God. I mean, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 talking about the strong delusion that's coming. I think that is the mark of the beast. That's what I think it is. People taking that.
That's what I'm kind of wondering. I'm wondering if that's maybe a possibility why God allows it to happen. It's like, to kind of test people, like if they're going to trust Him, rather than because we walk by faith, not by sight.
Right.
And when the allies of God are being overcome, it's going to seem like, well, what God is, He doesn't, he's losing. So it's going to seem like it's going to be like a trial, like a massive trial, like. Are we going to walk by faith, what we're seeing, or, what the Word
believe the Word of God.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's true.
So lots of bandwagon people, for sure, man.
Yeah.
I mean, just take into account what's going on right now with the vaccinations. Just an example.
Right.
People are not thinking for themselves, not looking into things for themselves, for the most part. They're believing what the government tells them. Because the government's like my daddy. He's always watching out for me. He gives me money. He provides for me. He even bribes me to take the vaccine. Tells me how good it is. And people don't look into it for themselves. They just believe whatever daddy says. Right? And so that's an example of a little small picture of what's going to happen much worse later on. I'm not taking a vaccine that could destroy your health and make things much worse for you, but actually worshiping Satan himself. But this is all kind of, moving us toward that direction to dull down our senses and to desensitize us to just do whatever he wants us to do in the end. But if we stay in the Word, and we stay in prayer, and we keep our common sense, I mean, really, there are some people who don't have Jesus right now. They simply have common sense, and they're seeing through it. So we need all those things, the sense God has given us to think for ourselves and to reason things out. Even that will save some people.
Also, one other question. So, there's also going to be, I know, after everything, is settled with the final battle. I know, well, not the final battle, but Armageddon. I know, there's going to be some unbeliever, people who didn't, obviously side with Satan.
Right.
But they're going to be, being able to see, what, the world would be like, under God's rule.
That's right.
So I'm wondering, was that were there people that just still, even though they weren't, believers, they still just refused, the mark or?
Yeah.
Because that kind of, when you said common sense, it kind of, when you think about that, was it just some, I don't feel comfortable, doing that, or was it a moment of, I wonder about that,
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're seeing now what some of those people will be like. I mean, people who are refusing to do these things that they don't want to do for their health's sake, I think they're beginning to see stuff. People who are seeing through voter fraud are beginning to see things. Not everybody's like this, but conspiracy theorists. I mean, some people go way, way too far, but some people are seeing things, and they're being called. But Daniel 7, we saw last week, verse 12, says, and for the rest of the beasts, rest of the kings and kingdoms, besides the ones of the fourth kingdom, it says, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And then Zechariah 14 says something very similar. It says, let's see here, Zechariah 14, verse 16. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So we see these things, And it becomes very obvious that there's just some people who are just going to see through things. I mean, they're not right with God. They don't have Jesus as the Lord and Savior. They're not born again. But they see through some things for whatever reason.
So do you think like they maybe didn't see enough of a benefit of taking the mark to just say, you know, I'm not going to take it? You know, I mean, 'cause obviously there's going to be some type of benefits. I mean, you looking in the eyes of an unbeliever, someone who's like not right with God, like you said. So that's kind of it's kind of interesting, you know, to think about that. You know, like how there are going to be actually some unbelievers that don't end up taking it. It's kind of you know, that's something I kind of marvel at, honestly. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievers aren't always completely foolish. I mean, they have common sense, they have intellect, they think things through. The intellect God's given them, of course. They think things through and use those things rightly. They don't use it completely right because they're not giving their life to Jesus. But they see through those things, and therefore they're given another chance. Like you said, it's a testing to some degree. That, okay, here's your opportunity to preserve your life. And if you want to preserve your life, here's what you have to do. Give authority, give your worship to the beast, to Antichrist. And some aren't willing to, no matter how ungodly they are, they're not willing to worship man. So we'll see who all will be included in that group. I think one thing we can say is like children who aren't to the state of accountability yet, they'll be included in that group. But as far as adults are concerned, we'll have to wait and see who else is involved in that. Right. Right, but as far as who those people are and why they're not doing it, you know?
I'm sure there'll be some patriots in that group.
Yeah, patriots, yeah. Yeah, probably some Trumpites,
Yeah.
those kind of people that they're,
Truthers and stuff.
yeah, truthers, Tea Party guys, people who follow Alex Jones, you know, I mean, those kind of people who I think of when I think about those kind of things. They're not right with God, but they're seeing through things to some degree. Some of them think they have the epitome of all the truth, but you tell them about Jesus, like they don't have that. It's like, man, you're not really a truther. You don't have the truth. So, but nonetheless, even though they don't have Jesus, they're not falling for these other things too.
Yeah.
And like I said, those things can go too far. People can go too far with those things and think things are true when they're really not. Like we didn't go to the moon.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Earth's flat and we didn't go to the moon. And those kind of things. I don't believe those things for a second. Yeah, man. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think like in Revelation 13, when it's speaking about, and it's using the personal pronoun he and he,
Yeah.
and he,
Yeah.
you could read that and not get that it's speaking of kingdom there.
Right.
But I think
Unless the he is talking about the beast.
yeah.
That's-
it seems like it's talking about a
Person. Yeah, it does seem like that.
That's what it seems
Yeah.
primarily talking about. So
Yeah.
if you were just to share that with somebody,
Yeah.
you'd read it, and if I was just to read 13, I think it's just a person. But I think Revelation 17 actually completely clears that up.
Yeah.
Because in verse 10, where it says, there are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come.
Right.
And when he comes.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
5 that have fallen obviously are talking about kingdoms.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's obvious. And the 1 has not yet come.
Right.
So I think, speaking of a he there, I think that kind of clears up how the personal pronoun can be used as speaking of a kingdom.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it's really no way to. I mean, obviously, the kingdom is going to have a resurrection
Yeah.
after dying, but the question still remains in my mind: is that also going to happen to the Antichrist? I don't know. At this point, I'm like, no, probably not. But I still think there's a possibility it could happen to him too. Because like I said, there's still that messianic complex that he wants to fool everybody and make him think that he rose from the grave. You know.
Isn't that in the Quran for their Messiah that he's rising as well?
Well, they believe he's already died
Right.
and he's coming back. So yeah, but that wouldn't happen like in the last days, it's already happened. He's already dead. And he's coming back. That's what I think. That's what I think they mean by that anyway.
Well, the reason why I asked that, one time I talked to we were doing a mosque, open mosque kind of thing, outreach,
Mm-hmm.
and I spoke to one of them and asked him, well, what do you think about Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And
Come back.
yeah, he's like, well, he didn't die on a cross, but he went up into heaven, and then he's going to come back, and he's going to die on the battlefield, and then rise again. That's what he told me. I don't know if that's in the Quran.
Huh.
I don't know if that's in the Quran, though. That's what I was asking, but that's what that guy told me.
Yeah, I've heard about that as well. Like they say Jesus didn't die.
Right, that he went into heaven, and he's coming back, and he's going to die in battle, and then come back to life.
I don't remember reading that. I don't remember reading that in the Quran. Like I know I read I think all of the Quran. I think I've read all of it.
Yeah.
I don't know it as well as I know the Bible, obviously.
Or maybe
But
the
I don't remember that part. It could be a hadith.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in a hadith. You said you read it too. You didn't see it in
That's
there.
what he told me. I don't know. I never researched it.
Yeah.
That's where then he went up and he's coming back, but I don't remember anything about him dying.
Dying in battle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they were telling me. That man and a couple other men in there were telling me that that's when they believe Jesus will die when he comes back, and then he'll rise again.
But their focus is more like on I think the actual Mahdi though. Like
The Mahdi.
He's their savior.
But then you have differences between the Sunni and Shia too.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Oh,
Their
that's true.
eschatology.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they have confusion because the one they're following is
The author of confusion.
them.
Yeah. Author of confusion.
Yeah.
Obviously, the eschatology of Islam is not God-breathed.
No.
That's right.
So that's given to them through the demonic realm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. We really can't rely on. I know some people would seek to point to what Islamic prophecy says and say, well, let's line it up, see if it lines up at least with the Bible. We can't really do that. I mean, the source is not God.
Right.
Now, could it happen to some degree? I mean, could it just be the devil?
inverted.
Yeah, could the devil be revealing his plans a little bit? The devil's revealing his plans a little bit. I don't know, but he's a liar. I mean, Allah's called the greatest deceiver.
Yeah, that's right.
So, can't trust anything the Quran says or the Hadiths.
But it does portray the Antichrist as the victim. In
Yeah.
Islamic eschatology.
Yeah.
And Esau as a false prophet. That's what it portrays, basically. So it is a perverted, inverted flip. In a sense, it's a doctrine of demons.
Mm-hmm.
In order to turn people away from the truth.
Yeah.